Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 144. And this episode, we wanted to get a little dark, a little romantic, maybe a bit of both. They can work well together, can't they? I think they can. And to facilitate that, we have from Deep End Games, the creators of the recently released Romancelvania, Bill and Amanda Gardner.
Hey.
Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you. This is going to be so fun. Thank you for having us.
We are very excited to have you. Geoff and I have been watching this game since before the Kickstarter went live, as soon as it was announced. Because something you need to know about me and Geoff is we are big Metroidvania fans, nice. Symphony of the Night, nice. Any Metroid under the sun.
I'm pretty sure over Discord it was. Matt was the one who came in basically like throwing the door open. You won't believe what's being made.
Oh, I love it. No, that's great. I mean, that's, so it's always a risk when you take a bunch of different things that normally aren't put together and you mash them up. And there's always that risk because, you've certain people are super hardcore about one thing and they don't get it because, we're trying to do a bunch of things. And really what it is just we talk about all these different love letters that we're writing. And we're just trying to bring joy. And part of that is just trying to find the right people who get what we're doing. And that's the most exciting thing to me.
The people who slam the door open and go, oh my God.
Exactly, yeah.
You'll never believe this shit.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was one of those things that, well, for me specifically, when Boyfriend Dungeon came out a few years ago now, that was made specifically for me, a queer dating game where you also do dungeon crawling. And so I feel like I've even said to Geoff around that time, the only thing that would be more perfect would be a Castlevania dating sim.
Oh God.
Literally
for real?
years later. And so
light paraphrasing.
It's really cool to see. At least funny, I saw a headline on one of the articles wrote about the game that you guys did horny correctly. You did it right.
Yeah, Dual Shockers just, cool. Shared that, yeah.
And I love that idea. But before we get into the nitty gritty of the game, talk a little bit about the Kickstarter. Obviously, you guys are a brand new indie studio. This is your first big game.
Second title total, yeah.
Sure.
After Perception.
Yeah, well, so Perception was much more of a sort of an art house thing for us. It was a bit of a stepping stone for us. Obviously, our first game as a company, but, I had worked in AAA for about 12 or 13 years. And I was going to try and spread my wings and do my own thing. But first, I just wanted to, I had worked on all these big, huge games, multiple, tens of millions of dollar budgets with hundreds of people and that whole thing. And I wanted to take a step back and do something that was a little different, something that Perception, our first title, without getting too much into the history there. I wanted to explore a lot of different ways to present narrative with Amanda. I wanted to explore interesting concepts like spatial relations and exploration and really live in the player's head, put you in the shoes of a blind woman. And what that allowed me to do is just really, they always talk about information being the enemy of horror. And I'm a little leery to use that word with Perception because it's more of a psychological horror than jump at you kind of thing, jump scares. And there's certainly no gore or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I like living in people's heads. I like the psychological stuff. And that's what we were really exploring there. And then we sort of went off on a little bit of exploring some other horror titles. And then suddenly we had this idea for Romancelvania.
Yeah, we were working on something else. It was horror. It was like a horror anthology. And, we have 4 kids, and having worked on horror for years now, it started to weigh us down, mentally, emotionally, I'm a very silly person, and it was just dragging me down. Mm-hmm. So every Halloween, Bill and I have been together for 23 years.
Amazing.
Every Halloween, we play Symphony of the Night. And a few years ago, he just kind of was like, what's up with all these monsters in Dracula's mansion? Why is there a Salem witch down there? What are they doing? Is he having a party? And we just sort of laughed. And then he just paused and said, Romancelvania. And I my jaw dropped and I just said, take my money, whatever this is, I want in. And, that word kind of marinated with us for a while. And we started to mention it to our dev friends, hey. So I'm going to say something. Just respond. I was like, Romancelvania. And they were like, shit, what do we got to do to get in on this? Yeah. And eventually Bill said, I know we've worked on this other project, a fair amount. We had a playable, game. And he was like, do you want to do Romancelvania? And it was a full body yes. Drop everything we're doing. Whatever Romancelvania is, we're going to figure it out together and we're going to make it. So.
Yeah.
I love that. And so then obviously you guys leaned into Kickstarter to put it out to the people. Was that always the plan? Was that always the idea, is to like Kickstarter back a game like this and then make it from there?
So we had a good experience with Perception on Kickstarter, and I do love that sort of camaraderie, that sort of early feedback, and you're just building a community early on. And with a title like this, like we played around, and in fact, we did reach out to a few publishers, but we knew like early on, and even before we did, we're like, this is the kind of thing that, listen, I don't mean to be a jerk about it, but publishers are great for a lot of things, but they generally don't necessarily have the vision of like taking different things and putting them together. Like, the example that I always give is that, you know, everyone passed on BioShock, every publisher under the sun, and then we had to go out and do all kinds of, like, not to go on a tangent, go to extreme measures to get enough interest that we could get a publisher interested. And we had to drive up all kinds of press and this kind of stuff way before we even had prototypes of the game, just to show, hey, there's a need for this. People really want to buy this. We really want to see a spiritual successor to System Shock 2.
And then once it came out, everyone tried to ape it, but you had to get that first.
Yeah. So I mean, that's always the challenge. Is, you know, you mentioned Boyfriend Dungeon. In a lot of ways, that made things a lot easier for us to be able to be like, oh, it's kind of like that. And we're like, well, not really, but yeah. You know, it's like there's quite a few differences, but you get how these things can go together. And to me, these things have always gone together in games like Dragon Age and Mass Effect and basically any of the BioWare games. But games, they often have these romanceable characters as a sort of sub thing. And we always played the games and we're always like, I wish we could do more with this. Right. So anyway, we chopped it around a little bit, and then we're like, we knew this is going to be a Kickstarter thing. We got to build up, we got to find our people and build up an audience that way. Yeah. So we went to Kickstarter, and that's its own saga. And again, it worked out great
in the end.
But it was, you know, if I can be blunt for a second, it was pretty dire.
It took a year off my life.
So the game had changed so much, the Kickstarter game. We didn't realize it. We were like, oh, we've done a Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, we know how to do a Kickstarter.
And we're like, it's a completely different audience this time. But, you know, hey, well, you know, we know our peeps, and we have a decent outreach that we can go out in the dev community and find our people and that kind of thing. But we launched, and, you know, like the rules had changed with Kickstarter.
Well, it had been about 5 years between the two.
It was about, yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't realize how much people had kind of gamified Kickstarter, how people, we always came at it from like, hey, we need to ask what we need for the bare minimum to make this thing, and the way it works now is foolishly so.
How foolish of you, being honest on the internet.
Well, because I'm sure you're aware, what they tell you to do is you put a really super lowball number there, like $20,000-$30,000, so you can smash it in the first few hours. And it's become like a race now, where it's like, oh, smash in the first 2 hours, and it's like, yeah, but you know, it's like,
you need more than that.
We had people giving us their condolences after 2 days. The campaign, because it didn't fund in the first 24 or 48 hours, we had people being like, oh, just pull it and try again. We're like, we're 2 days in.
Well, it wasn't just people. It was we had reached out to this one company who specializes in Kickstarter marketing, and we reached out to them about a month before, and for whatever reason, they didn't get back to us. And then it was like, there was sort of wishy-washy responses about a week before we went live. And then finally we went live, they went dark, and then 2 days into the campaign, they're like, oh, you should pull the campaign. You're not going to make it. There's no way you're going to make it. Pull it and list it for like $30,000.
That's disingenuous. That's garbage.
Are you kidding me? Yeah. And so we kind of limped through the campaign for a while, and we're, you know, making progress. But it's like, it's pretty clear we're not going to make it. And then we got some of the more condolences, you know, people genuinely wishing us the best. But, you know, that really lit a fire under us. I was like, there's no way this isn't going to get made. There's no way this shouldn't make it as a Kickstarter. It was just
we shouldn't be penalized for being honest.
Well, it wasn't that. It was more.
I mean, morally, yes. No, you should not be penalized for being honest on the internet about a video game Kickstarter. I mean, also in the last 5 years or so, there's been enough like big promises that have been so much vapor about things that, you know, having that sturdiness really should be better supported, but.
Yeah, we rallied. It was like, if you look at, we have the curve, and it's like, it was like 36 hours or so. We started to rally, just put this incredible turnaround going on to the point where Kickstarter themselves was like, what are you guys doing this? Like, how are you doing this? Like, and, you know, we pulled it off. It was a miracle.
Yeah, we broke some records, right?
Nice.
I think, you know, I don't think they'd want to ever publish, or like, you don't want to encourage procrastinators, right? You don't want to be like, oh, you'll be fine. You definitely want to hit it as soon as you can.
Well, I mean, that's like a lot of fundraisers or charity events. Like the first, 10% or 5% of it where people are like really getting that like big push. And then I'm, as an avid watcher of like Games Done Quick events,
Nice.
the jump that happens in the last 24 hours is truly something to behold, where they go from like $1.2 million to $3 million.
Yeah.
It's a 7-day event and most of it happens on the back end. So
Yeah.
it's not so crazy, but I guess it looks very different for a Kickstarter environment. And I
Somehow,
don't know if anybody outside of it thinks about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I suppose the sort of feeding frenzies that can happen, I guess, both ways, or anyway. But the fundraiser, well, that's a really interesting one because I know what you're talking about. I don't follow them that closely, but I do think I've seen that phenomenon. That's cool.
Well, because then I think like with a Kickstarter, you run into that sort of thing with stretch goals or those ones that go in for the, you had Romancelvania had a $200,000 goal on Kickstarter, come in on it with 30,000. Okay, we've hit 30,000 in the first, 3 hours. Great. And then you have to start putting in stretch goals to get people to put in more money or anything like that when you haven't even hit your target goal for what you needed in the first place.
Yeah. No, that's true. Human psychology.
It's a wild thing.
I want to talk a little bit about the making of the game. So I've gotten through the first 3 chapters so far.
Awesome.
I love it. I'm really enjoying it.
Thank you.
My short-term favorite character is P.S. Ellie because, I love all the characters. I love all the writing, but there's something about P.S. Ellie's voice actor performance that's just like so bubbly and it just pulls you in.
I gotta say, I love the voice performances, the voice actors you've pulled for this.
Yeah.
Top notch.
Thank you.
We love our voice actors so much.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
we did definitely spent quite a bit of time on that, and it's important, like making the characters come to life, and we tend to reach on everything we do here. We hit outside of our weight class, and the idea of having 12 datables is a lot, but then, well, not the Van Helsings, but voicing them all. There's a tremendous. What was the page count or whatever? Like how
It's
many?
a 500-page script.
Wow.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
It's just like when you have this idea and you got to make it as good as possible. You got to make it fully realized. And for us to really make these characters come to life, it was just a no-brainer for us, right?
Yeah.
But tremendous amount of work, a lot of time. But the talent, we really lucked out.
We used several actors who we worked with before. So from Perception, the lead character, Cassie, she plays Lyra and Ilessa. I think she absolutely killed it. And then Richard Orlow, who basically plays almost all the males in Perception, he played Fenton, and he plays another character who you've not met. But he's amazing.
We do have some surprises down the road.
Yeah.
Hoping
Fenton is delightful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we love Fenton. I love Fenton.
Yeah.
I love Fenton.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what's really impressive about this game for me is like when you're playing, like indie games come in all different shapes and sizes and varieties, and like I knew going into this game that it was going to be equal parts, really great and fun to play and really ridiculous, right? Like that's what you want from something like this when you put Romancelvania on the title card. And like my favorite things is that there are moments where Drac is absolutely sincere and sweet, and then there are other moments where you're just laughing because this is, and I mean this is a compliment, the dumbest thing you've ever heard,
Yes.
right? And I love that diversity when penning a script like this, that like you said, 500 pages, this narrative of the reality show, like, was the reality show always the framework? Like, did you have that idea from the beginning or did that come later?
It was not always the framework. We knew that we wanted dating monsters, right? And so we had sort of a variety of frame stories. And what's funny is that the first scene and the last scene, I had to rewrite both of them about 5 to 10 times just to get it right. Like you really need to stick the landing and you need to hook people, right?
Right.
And so there were so many different beginnings. There were so many different endings. Ultimately, the frame story, we figured out the reality TV thing like relatively quickly. But at first we were like, what if it's a dance? Like, what if it's like the Monster Mash or, like what actually we wanted, originally it was not Drac that was the playable, it was Jules Van Helsing.
That's amazing.
Ooh.
I like that.
That's something I'd love to get into that at some point. You could do some real deep
show some
dives,
early demos. Yeah.
The monster hunter dating the monster.
No, pretty much. No, that was exactly it. And
I love that.
there's a lot of like I talk about mashups a lot. I talk about, hitting outside of our weight class. And you try and find these shortcuts. And it's funny because going back to Perception, originally when we started pitching it to people before the Kickstarter and even after the Kickstarter, and throughout the process, the entire project, we'd be like, oh, you play as a blind woman, she uses echolocation, and people are like, oh, like Daredevil. And at first I was like, oh, yes, I wouldn't be like this to someone's face because I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's frustrating because you don't want to be, to me, I guess I'm a bit sensitive about what I create. You don't want to be like precious. But at some point, you don't want to be like, oh, that's you copying. And that's not what the people are saying. They have that shortcut. And for a while, I would try and avoid that. And eventually, as we got more and more into it, I was like, it's a bit like Daredevil. You can use echolocation, but it's a little different. What the reality TV framework gives us is something that people are familiar with. You talk about Dracula being like the star of The Bachelor. People are like, oh, that's hilarious. And that immediately sets that tone. Because when you try and pitch it, we're like, oh, it's Dracula, he's dating monsters. That, I think, generally speaking, evokes a very serious tone. It's like, it's a little lighthearted, and you talk about the romance side, but you talk about the monster, you talk about Dracula, dating, I don't know, the Bride of Frankenstein or something like that, or, Wolfman or whatever. I think by default, I think that would come off as a little more serious, right?
Yeah.
But when you say The Bachelor, you say reality TV, people are like, oh, that's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, yeah.
The Grim Reaper is the host of, Dracula's Bachelor. Oh, no matter how far off those hashtags, I suppose it goes, people are already strapped in correctly for that.
Yes. Expectations managed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a very funny thing, too, of Dracula and vampires in general, as romantic figures, have gone through so many ebbs and flows and waves and everything else. And there's a very interesting, from the word jump for me playing through this, there's a bit of the Symphony of the Night style, Alucard Dracula, I am so very gothic.
Yes.
So overwrought about everything. With a little bit of just Twilight. This is fucking stupid. Okay?
Yeah.
And I think it gets you there and it melds there. And like an annual play for y'all is Symphony of the Night and like game recognized game on that one. But where were you looking as far as, I guess, the vampire angle, I suppose? Because they're the good classic.
Always loved vampires. Always. All of my
You're in good company on this call.
My crushes throughout life have all been vampires. I loved Lestat. Right, and Louis. I loved Edward Cullen. I loved Eric Northman. I loved Spike. I love them all. I love them. I still love them all.
Same. I won't go into things, but yes.
Yes. So yeah, I've sort of pulled from all the sort of vampire tropes and vampire crushes, and there's just something irresistible about vampires, and I really tried to capture that with Drac. And I also wanted to capture the mania I wanted people to feel about Drac. So I always give this reference, but I wanted to have the Elvis of vampires. You see old videos of women watching Elvis and they're tearing at their faces and pulling their hair. They're so into it, right?
I was literally seeing something of that recently. Yes,
right?
Yes, like today.
I wanted that mania. I wanted like Drac to be like, pull your hair out sexy. So
I think I saw that referred to as Dionysian frenzy.
Yes.
That.
Heck yeah. You were people.
That's a
yes.
phrase.
Yeah, it was the first time, like today was the first time I read that. And I'm like, why is this the first time I'm hearing?
That's amazing.
I love
It's a
it.
good description.
You're
right.
It's a fantastic description, and I'm going to mentally file that away.
Oh,
So
I'm
thank you
gonna
very
use-
much. Right?
I'm going to use it daily.
You're
The
putting
world
it in your
needs
Twitter
this.
bio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I love
brilliant.
it. But yeah, those are some of my vampy references, and also like when we were creating male Drac at first, we're saying like, okay, we want that like iconic sort of handsome, and we sort of talked about like who to draw upon. And I just remember, so I'm an English teacher, and I once was teaching Streetcar Named Desire, and I passed out the books, and it had young Marlon Brando on the cover, and the girls are going, who is that? Right? So, that's a bit of a reference to that, like, oh my God, magnetism kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the character designs are incredible. They all stand out.
Thank you.
You have two versions. You have the 3D models and then, of course, the 2D art sprites. I'm curious with the monsters. So there's 12 datables, as you mentioned. I imagine you didn't start with 12. You must have had more and narrowed it down. You probably had a list of ideas. Can you share a few monsters that maybe didn't make it in, or like ideas that were like lofty that you were like, oh, this one, no, actually, that's not the right
Fold
fit?
them into this one.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm always a bit leery to talk about this just for two reasons. Number one,
Sure.
we may resurrect, which I'm fine with because things change.
For DLC, sure, yeah.
Well, yeah. There's that.
For the Cabal, yes.
But
For
then
the
there's
DLC.
that. Then there's also the fear that people are like, well, you shouldn't have cut them. That sounds awesome, or like. So
Sure.
that's always a fear. I think we did have such a wealth of characters, and whatever happens in the future, if we resurrect them, they'll probably change. But the main reason why we didn't exactly have a formula, but we definitely had a bunch of different tests to make sure someone fit in. I think that we have all these different, you talk about the love tropes, you talk about the reality TV dating tropes, you talk about how they fit into the monster tropes, all these different pieces here. And, we would kind of put them up on a board informally and be like, okay, we have, Fenton is a fancy man wolf, and he covers this niche, and he does this sort of love, and you kind of plot them all out, and things move around. And so one character who was in our Kickstarter, we had written quite a bit of her, and we had a bunch of her concepts, and we had her world. Eden, this character named Eden, which was a forest spirit. And as we got more into development, we realized there was entirely too much overlap with Vess, right?
A little bit.
There was.
We couldn't narrow down a design that we thought was innovative and interesting enough. Like she was beautiful, and her archetype was different from the others. So she was like the spoiled brat reality.
She's Kardashian.
She was very Kardashian, right?
Yeah.
We kept trying to refine the look, couldn't quite get it. And we had the voice, but she wasn't quite likable enough just yet because we were trying so hard on that brat angle that we were like, you know what? Let's table it. And
but it was also the monster angle, or I shouldn't say monster. We say supernatural because, Vess obviously is into monster. So we talk about her being a forest spirit, and then we tried out all these different ideas to make her stand out from just like what niche is she filling in the supernatural space. And then how can that make the relationship more interesting? And originally she was just like I said, human sized, but they're just like, okay, so she's kind of not really reading as like a forest spirit. And then we would push in different directions. Like, I was playing around with making her into like a pixie.
Yeah, like what if she was really tiny? That could be interesting.
And then we're like, well, what if she's a 40-foot woman? That kind of, and they're playing around with all these different ideas. And we never really settle on anything, but she's one I'd like to revisit at some point to figure out exactly what that is. Sure. But she was clearly one that was just like problematic because we couldn't figure out the niche.
Yeah.
There's a bit too much overlap. And so she was one we kind of said, let's put her on ice for a little while.
Yeah, we tabled. Yeah.
I mean, but I love you talking about the dynamics of it, because I didn't even think of that, right? But it's so obvious. You have the reality TV tropes. You have the like a certain sexuality you're trying to reach, or a part of the LGBTQ community, or even like I mentioned PSL earlier because not only do I like her writing, but like when she talks about bondage and when she talks about sub and dom culture, it seems like you guys are actually well researched. Like you did look into this information. You wanted to make sure that these characters aren't just spouting out catchphrases.
Oh yeah, no.
And so I think the reason that I was charmed by her as a character is because she's not like cliche. She's genuinely speaking some heartfelt stuff, and sounds like you guys did some research. And so I have to imagine when developing the relationships and the romance, which is going beyond just basic game mechanics, you had to do a lot of research outside of what your already inherent knowledge was. And it's just impressive to me. I appreciate that. You can tell when a game is fake or like very superficial. And there are romances in games that are very superficial, right? And so it seems like you guys actually put the care into, from what I've seen so far, at least, of the relationships, to really, from the writing standpoint, at least make it feel authentic.
Yes, absolutely. I did the research long ago. I am a romance writer.
Nice.
No pen names revealed, but all of my books dealt with kink, and they're all kink positive, and they're all very well researched. So yeah, I'm glad that PSL and hopefully Alessa ring true. And, that whole distrust of switches thing, like I wanted to bring that up with PSL, like it's a thing. And I wanted people to, like, it's a sex positive game. It's not, we say it's naughty, but not dirty, right? Like it's a celebration. It's not anything that should be, frowned upon. And that's why I wanted PSL to be as bubbly and happy and positive as possible. Cause it's like, look, this is not about hurting. Right? Like,
well, and I think the other aspect of PSL, I don't know if you've gotten to this part, I remember where it is, and this isn't really a spoiler, but The line that always resonated with me with her was, all good bodies are good bodies. And she's talking about how, I think she's talking about Brosifer specifically, about how he's one of the few characters, she's not really into, and it's because of that. And so she's kind of, I guess, in love with spirits and love. I that really, I think she's bubbly, but I think it's also her love is infectious. I think that, because it's a genuine love for, she just loves love, I don't know. I think that's special. I don't really know where that's reflect. I haven't seen too many characters reflect in that way, and I think you hit on that really well with
she said, if you're sentient, I get a penchant. She doesn't care.
So there's a lot going on with her that's really good.
I like that.
I want to talk about the mechanics a little bit. Obviously, this is a Metroidvania, a terrible genre name for a genre we all love, right? Like, that we all admit. And there may never be a better one. But, like, I love that, obviously, you're coming from a place of love of Castlevania and other games like it. Was it intimidating to craft one of these? I mean, you talk about playing Symphony of the Night so many times, like, and now you're making one. There must have been, like, I'm sure there are things still you look at and go, that's not, like, I wish I could, like, there just must be so much that you see because you're such a fan of the genre. And did that add challenge to developing and creating a game like this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it took a while for us to, or for me anyway, to get the courage to say, like, no, we're going to do this. Because generally speaking, I had only worked on first-person games, mostly shooters. And, I know that genre very well, but I'm always trying to push myself and get a little bit uncomfortable. If you're not growing, you're I don't know. I don't know what the saying is, but I always want to be growing. Is this probably some witticism there, but and so there was definitely an intimidation factor, but ultimately what I was interested in doing is trying to capture my love for the genre, and specifically for Symphony of the Night. I'm not interested in, like, recreating it. I like, there's quite a few nods in there, obviously, as you had mentioned.
Yeah, sure.
But to me, the pieces that I don't hear celebrated enough in the space, I think right now, it's so awesome to see so many Metroidvanias take off, and it's so popular right now. I think that there's been a real hard shift towards, like, the hardcore. And that's fine. I love that exists. But I mean, there's you get the Souls influence, which is cool. That you see a huge, like, push on that space. You get games like Salt and Sanctuary and that kind of thing, which is friggin' an unbelievable game. Too tough for me, if I'm being honest. I'm terrible. But
we've all only got so many hours in our lives,
right? Yeah, exactly. So I like the idea of really pushing in the exploration in the atmosphere space, because for me, that's a huge component of Symphony that is, like, impossible to replicate. I've seen so few games really try. I mean, like, I'm sure everyone's trying. Like, Hollow Knight is just, I'm not a huge Hollow Knight fan, to be perfectly honest. I think I totally appreciate everything they did. And it's, I think, a world-class, like, top-notch in every sense. Like, there's masterclass stuff happening there. But particularly in the atmosphere space, like, the tone that they have there is just, like, absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, I've only been able to get about 12 hours in, and I get stuck. And then again, I'm both from a skill, but also, like, where am I going now? And then I put it away for a little while, and I try and pick it back up. And again, this is in no way saying anything bad about it, because it's a masterpiece, and I recognize that. But for me, one of the things I was trying to address, for example, was just about the overall connectivity with the space, and try and make, this is controversial, but for me, Castlevania 2 was a really, really big influence, and it's a beautiful mess of a game. Castlevania 2.
No, that's accurate, and no arguments here. It is a beautiful mess of a game.
Yeah. So, and in particular, I just love the sense of place and the world that's there, and the fact that, not to pick on Hollow Knight again, but even Symphony of the Night, like, I have a giant map of it around the corner here. I should get a picture or whatever, but I have a giant, like, probably 6-foot print up of the map. And again, impeccable level design, but it's so stupid, right? Like, if you try and map it out, aside from the fact that I've played it 1,000 times, none of it makes any sense, and that's fine. It doesn't need to. That's not at all what it's trying to do, and that's totally fine.
This castle is a creature of chaos.
There you go. Yeah. So it's funny how they have that perfect narrative to fill in that issue. But for me, I want to be able to say, like, again, the same way in Castlevania 2, you go through the forest past the graveyard and you find this village, and then you go back through the swamp and go to, and I just love the way that things are connected in a natural, ridiculous, but natural way that you can kind of map out. And because I love walking through spaces in my head after the fact and filling in some of the blanks and whatnot. And I always wanted to try and push a little bit more in that space. And that was liberating for me, be able to say like, hey, I'm not trying to go toe to toe with Hollow Knight or Symphony of the Night, because those are like impeccable level design that are all about the tiniest little fine tuning of where a door is. You know what I mean? This is much more like, hey, go out into the world and have fun. And you know what? If you want to throw around rat darts at every enemy, have fun. Or if you want to go and use lightning, or you want to use crystals, or just like give the player a bunch of tools and say have fun, rather than like push the player up against the wall and say you have to beat this boss, you're outclassed, you stink at the game, or you have to go find that one door that's up in somewhere in the world that you got to remember where it. Like overcoming that stuff feels great, right? That's one of the beauties of Metroidvanias is you basically have exploration leading to discovery and then leading to mastery, right? So you're exploring, you're exhilarated, and you're finding all this new stuff out, and then you're discovering something new, right? And you discover a new power, and then you go and you master that power, and you go master and demonstrate it on bosses, and you go around and own people, then you explore some more, and you discover some more, and it's just that cycle, which is awesome. I wanted to de-emphasize the challenge a bit more and put it more on the atmosphere and exploration. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's perfect. I mean, I am someone into camps, right? Like Metroid is one of my favorite franchises.
Nice.
Also one of the harder ones of those games. But like I replayed Metroid Fusion very recently because they put it on Nintendo Switch Online.
Yep.
And it's my favorite Metroid game. And the reason it is because it's challenging, but it's kind of linear.
Yes.
Like each area is a Metroidvania kind of area, but then the computer tells you where you're headed next, and you know exactly where you're going. And I like that about it. And what I love about Romancelvania's layout is there's never a time I don't like walking through it. And you give fast travel and you give other options, but like sometimes when I'm out in the forest, I'll walk all the way back to the castle.
Cool.
Because I just like exploring the areas.
Cool.
It feels like a lived-in world.
Cool.
And hearing you talk about it this way kind of cements that. I want to talk a little bit about enemy design, because not only are their names great, but like
yeah, I got some questions. Does the pun come first or does the design come first?
Right?
Because I don't know the first time I went, oh, for the love of God. But I did it a lot, and it's always with affection.
That's what we're going for.
Yeah,
that
no, it's
like I
reaction.
saw Down and Out Burger in the mall, and I went, you
Nice.
got...
Nice. No, I know
Fine.
exactly. There's so much. This was just so much fun to work
We're
on.
sickos.
But to answer your question, it was a real mix.
Yeah.
So in some cases, we'd let Reiko, like, we need a few flying enemies. And she would just go and draw like a bunch of ridiculous, like at one point she had a flying pierogi.
Yeah.
With a square, like, and that's that. For example, that was the metalhead. The metalhead.
Yeah.
She did like, and it was like, yeah, okay, it's a headbanger. Yeah, obviously, but that one's pretty straightforward, right? In some cases, where with like Booty Bay, we were kicking around some ideas, and I think it's contentious. We're not sure who came up with the can tuna, but we're like, the bottom line is
thinking of when I asked this question. By the way,
Yeah.
there you go. Yeah, the idea of a giant tuna that does the can dance and tuna can and that whole thing, and so that one was a pun based on the need to fill in a niche. And in some cases, there are enemies where it's like, okay, we need an enemy that does X, Y, or Z. Like I'm not the happiest with the name of it, but we were kind of like, what is this guy? The Ghost in the Sheldon. So it's incredibly stupid.
Well, none of the puns are specific to like... There's none of them that jump out as, oh, this is outside of the form. Like when you first go to Grimm to trade in tokens of affection, which I freaking love as a currency, to get upgrades, and you see the neon in the back, ain't no lie, bye, bye, bye. And it's like, well, yes, that's exactly what you would do. And I've seen maybe I've missed the other boy band references, but I've been looking, and this still works. So if you're just pulling from wherever, line of sight.
Pulling from wherever is exactly it. And so I do want to thank you.
That's Castlevania.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I do want to thank you because you were the first person who's acknowledged that. And I was starting to get a little worried that because I was like, actually, the reason why I referenced that so much is because there was this infomercial from a dancer who was showing people how to dance, and he does this little move where he's going over the dance, and he goes, ain't no lie, bye, bye, bye. And it's just been playing in my head for about 15 years or whatever. And so I'm just so happy to be able to work that into the game and that somebody recognizes it. So,
yeah.
Of course.
But a big part of it was just like, we just shooting stuff around.
We're just
right?
so stupid. I mean, like,
Good. Thank you.
I
You're
have to
amongst your
say,
people.
and I am taking credit for this because ultimately the story got garbled along the way, much like, did Cartman or Jimmy write the fish sticks joke in South Park?
Right.
I said we need an octopus that shoots guns called the Gloctopus.
Oh, no.
So the Gloctopus was mine. And then it was mine. I will stake my life on that. The Gloctopus was mine. I was
and
so
this is
proud.
why video games are great, because those dumb puns that you thought of when you were 16 and never thought you'd have a place for them.
Yep.
Here
Now
we
you
are.
do.
Yeah.
Good, and we all benefit.
Now that was a big part of this. Is just actually there wasn't a whole lot that was sticking around in our brains. A lot of it was like, I'm trying to think. Was there anything that we're like, hey, someday we're gonna work this into a game?
No, it was more just like, throw it at the wall and see what sticks, and let's be as uncensored and ridiculous as possible and not stop ourselves being like, hey, no, that's dumb, or like, hey, no, that's too far. At no point did either of us say that to each other.
Nice.
And if the joke landed, great, and if it didn't make it, but we never said, no, that's dumb at any point.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that was consciously we had said, we're just going to, as you said, throw a lot out there. And we know that a lot of it's not going to land, and that's fine. But our whole thing was just volume, which was to throw out a whole bunch of stuff. Because there's so many things where like, that's hilarious. And it doesn't matter if some percent of people don't get it. There's always going to be some percent, but it doesn't matter if half the people or most of the people don't get it. Those who do get it, it's going to be great. Because, I mean, the ain't no lie thing, I don't know what percent of people.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some really old references, too. Like, we're in our 40s. Like, there are some musical references that we know that the youngins aren't going to get, but maybe you guys will get. Like, I feel like something Grimm says about a power, like, is definitely like a reference to like a 90s song.
What
like,
power?
we've got some like, it's scattershot. Like, we love Arrested Development. There's definitely references. We love I Think You Should Leave. There's definitely references. There's definitely references to old school 90s hip hop. Like, it's just whatever is in our brain at the time, and we just let it happen. But let me just like get smart here though. The theme of the game is about letting go and nostalgia and how much you should hang on to and how much you should let go of. So we let that sort of like nostalgia and silliness out there because ultimately this tied back to what should you hang on to, what should you let go of as a theme. So.
Yes, just so we don't sound completely unhinged here, like that was absolutely something that drove, aside from it being fun and making it so much fun to hope that it connects with people, but also just come in every day and just spitball ridiculousness. We try and reference that theme throughout in every way. I mean, it's like, again, it's about Drac moving on, and the person who's showing Drac how to do that is the Grim Reaper, right? Who better to teach you to let go than the Grim Reaper, right? And just every little piece, we tried to work that in, just that theme. And like, it starts off with a pretty on the nose Castlevania. We didn't do the what is a man thing, but we, obviously the symphony reference there, and the sort of like the retro castle and being trapped in the past.
Okay, cool. That is what I thought that was being. I loved that it was a pixel background anyway, but I'm like, is this Drac being trapped in the past?
Good.
Yeah. It landed.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see what you think when it all comes. Well, hopefully it comes together. But at the end of the game, just see whether or not we pay that off. Because one of the great things about working on a game like this is that it allows us to really pull from all these different references, but explore all these different themes and presentations specifically. And I think that in a lot of ways that empowers us. The same way, you're watching a horror movie and they have those comedic sections, right? Where it's just like that relief you get. It's just like, that's the best comedy of all time, right? When you are in an incredibly tense movie and then all of a sudden they have that little section where it's like, we're going to let down our hair. I think the ridiculousness does set us up for a couple of the gut punches that we do, particularly towards the end. And that's important. I think you try and accentuate your valleys are much more valleys when you have the peaks, the mountains next to them. And I'm butchering all kinds of metaphors today.
It's okay.
It's totally fine.
But yeah, I think it's fun to play with all that we're playing with right now.
To kind of go to your idea of like Symphony of the Night, what are all of these monsters doing here? Castlevania or like those sorts of kitchen sink horror games are patently ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And sometimes they play with it and sometimes they don't. And this is a way to play with it that more established, storied, stolid franchises.
It gives it a frame. Yeah.
He gives it a frame.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can explore those. And just as you were saying before, it comes from a place of love. It comes from a place of joy. And that's what carries these things through. And that's certainly what's got me excited to play through the rest of this game.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely. I do want to spend some time talking about the sound design and the music too, which is also phenomenal.
Yeah.
The first time Grim disappears and it goes poof, I went, oh, okay, all right, that's funny.
Tells you a lot about him, though.
Right, but then by the third time, I'm actually laughing because it's like, it's the rule of threes, and it's just like, oh no. And then I think when PSL disappears, she also says poof. I'm like, okay, now I get it. Like some of the sound effects are very genuine, like Castlevania-y sound effects, like vampire hunting, combat sound effects. And then some of them are just goofy, like every time you pick up a bonerang, the
Boing.
the boing. Like I just like, and I get it now saying the title of the weapon out loud, like it all makes sense. But like talk a little bit about putting the sounds together and the music together, because it's equal parts just impressive and really cool and absolutely utterly ridiculous.
That's always the goal.
Yeah, right.
So I've been lucky enough to work with Jim Bonney for at this point probably about 10 years now. I worked with him on BioShock Infinite. He was the music director, and for a while I was working on like the multiplayer specific stuff, and so I worked very closely with him to generate sounds along with the music. And so that was honestly one of the more rewarding relationships that I've had. And, you know, when Irrational sort of ran its course or whatever, he was one of the first people I reached out to with Perception, because, you know, it's a very oral driven game, and, you know, loved working with him. And so he's an uber talent, gifted storyteller, just fantastic dude in general, like just joy to work with. And again, uber talented. So in Romancelvania, we had to brief him up front because I don't know that he's had any experience with anything comedic. He's a funny guy, right? And I told him that like we're gonna be walking all kinds of different lines, and I don't know like exactly how it's going to. I know what's right in my head, but like there's gonna be a lot of trial and error, and sometimes we pushed it a little too far into the goofy and a little too far into the comedic, and it was stomping too much on the serious moments and the romantic touching moments, and so. That to me has been the biggest challenge. And as you point out, it's funny you mentioned that when Grim teleports sound, we thought it was hilarious the first time we heard it, and then we got a little bit like, okay, cool. And it's been a fine wine for us, because I think it's probably the sound I've heard the most in the game. I've heard it thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And Lindsay, producer, and she did a lot of the sound editing and a lot of VO. She's done it all in the game. She did design, you name it. She works back there, and she's just, whenever either of us here are playing the game, we hear that sound, we just lose it. So that's aged well. But I think, again, just a lot of it is just trial and error. We put a ton of sounds in the game, and games are all about iteration, of course, right? Mm-hmm. I think we did probably more iteration on this than most projects that I've worked on. And again, that's just the needs of the project. That's how things come together or don't come together. So most of it was just working with Jim, and in some cases, because it was such a tall order, we brought in another sound designer, Eli, who was super talented, and he was particularly good in the comedic space, because I would work very closely with Jim on a lot of the more serious moments and a lot of the more sort of, particularly like towards the end, and stuff that would need not just sound but music. We would tend to hit up the major beats, like the sort of cutscenes and that kind of thing, as one thing, and then we left a lot of the one-offs. So things like the can tunas and a lot of the sort of goofier, ridiculous enemies Eli would do, because those tend to be a little bit more discreet, a little bit more standalone. And you talk about the dependencies of, you know, an emotional, impactful moment, that you have to sort of make sure your tone is right and consistent in those. So I think that was a fun process, because we brought in fresh eyes with Eli to do some of the more one-off stuff, some of the item pickups, and then a lot of the enemies and that kind of thing. But yeah, like it's not something that... Sound tends to be something that gets forgotten until very late in most projects. Mm-hmm. I tend to bring sound in right away, like from the very beginning. Again, we throw a lot of stuff out, but the good thing is that we then build up a huge sound bed, and then sometimes we'll go back and be like, oh, we're not even using these sounds anymore, and we can find a way to repurpose them and that kind of thing. So yeah, process for sound, I definitely don't have it figured out. I love working with Jim, and so we just kind of find our way there. But
bring them in early, work with good people. That sounds like a great process.
Yeah. Certainly enjoy it.
First of all, I just want to take a moment to thank you for this game. I'm a backer. I'm in the
Thank you.
credits. It's my
Thank
first time in
you.
it's my first time being in the credits of a video game. It's very cool. But
Congrats.
I know I can go straight to the credits, and I did to look for my name, but I'm not going to post about it until I actually beat the game.
Nah.
But no, genuinely, like, I think what's always fun for me and Geoff about indie games and talking to people who make indie games is they are always, like, you talked about Castlevania 2 before. We had the pleasure of interviewing Hunter, who wrote Infernax, and Infernax is a love letter to that and other games.
They're another
like
one.
it.
What if Castlevania 2 and Zelda 2 were good
instead of, what they were.
I loved Zelda 2.
Yes.
I know you argue about it. Like,
I have love for
loved
both
that one.
Castlevania 2 and Zelda 2 and understand all the hate for it, but there's
Yes.
love. And so,
Yes.
yeah,
I also like
I
manga
share
too.
your passion for, no, don't write this off. Much can be done with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it.
But it's genuinely impressive what you guys have done. It's a fun game to play, and like, I hope you're proud of everything that you've done. The community is incredible.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what does it feel like now to have the game out? Obviously, you guys have been so responsive in working on fixes and, like,
Yep.
smaller issues, making sure that it's patched and ready to go. Do you know what's next? Obviously, support for the game since it just came out, but do you have ideas? Because as people who make stuff never stop making stuff, and so I
Never.
understand that, right? Never. And so obviously I don't expect you to reveal any big secrets here,
Sure.
but I imagine you are working on something. You have ideas for things. Once something's out, is it hard to stay focused on the thing in front of you instead of already letting your mind go to other places or work on other things?
Or how does the instinct to noodle before release or post-release? What's the shift there?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a whole fascinating conversation, and I love this stuff. I think that I'm not always the best at strategy. I tend to be pretty tactical. So, long story short, we do have 3 different ideas for where we want to take a sequel, and we have a whole bunch for additional updates for this, whether it's DLC or separate expansions or that kind of thing. And so tons of ideas. We have a laundry list of additional characters and themes and that sort of thing we'd like to explore. There's definitely one standout approach that I'm very bullish on. And we had one idea that we really liked, and we kind of let it sit, because usually most projects will, if they're healthy anyway, they'll, about 6 months before ship, you'll start kicking around ideas because you know your project at that point, and you can see where it's really going and how it's forming. And so we had this initial idea that we had put together a super quick slide deck just based on some initial, like, maybe it was like a week of discussions, like on the side at lunch, that kind of thing. So we put together a slide deck, and we pitched it around internally, and got some real good chuckles, real good interest, good themes, good use of sort of subversion and that kind of thing. And then we just let them sit for a little while. I tend to take a while to think about stuff. I'm not the best on my feet. I tend to sort of process stuff, and then I'll come back to it like weeks later. I'm like, this is it. This is what we're going to do.
So good. Let's do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had that epiphany, this sort of update to that pitch a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Was it?
And it was a much more of like oh, hell yes. No, that's it.
Yeah.
And when you know,
Yeah. And
It was one of those
It was
moments.
very similar where, like, early on, we knew Romancelvania was like, that's it. But how to present the framework that we talked about. And the original framework we had wasn't as clear as it could be, wasn't using the shortcuts that we talked about, didn't have that excitement. And this was the same difference. The only difference now was we didn't have to spend, I don't even know, was it some number of
6
months
months.
developing sort of the wrong thing. It's the idea of Romancelvania, but in a different presentation.
Right.
So we have that, and now, right now, the main thing is, like, I'm excited by the feedback, and a lot of them I was surprised by, like, oh, geez, I don't know how we didn't see that, and this kind of thing. And some of it was sort of contradictory to what we had heard in our own testing, and it went to, like, Play NYC and the demo they released, and this. So there were definitely some curveballs, but almost all of them were really, really good in terms of, like, oh, that's an easy fix, or that's something we should talk about. There's some things that I'm like, geez, like, I told you about the Castlevania 2 thing. And, frankly, from day one, I said I didn't want to do a map, which it looks like I may have made a huge mistake there. I'm personally, the main challenge for me, the way I designed the game, was about the challenge of understanding the space and the exploration and the discovery and that kind of thing. But, the reality is, when you say Metroidvania, and we use that term lightly,
sure,
there's an expectation there. And so we're looking very closely at that. That's frustrating me because I don't like playing the map. I don't like as much as I love Symphony of the Night, Like,
You want to look at the world, not
Play the
the
game,
yeah,
not the
and I
squares.
hate having to bring up that map. And I get the completionist thing. Like, I've got 200.6 a bunch. But I just don't like having to find that little pixel, you know?
And there's always that fight of how much information do you give before it becomes min-maxing. And no, I could definitely say, like, I'm one of those people where it's like, I'd like some kind of a map, even if it's just how the areas connect to each other, if only because anecdotally, I waited until this was working enough on Steam Deck before I started playing. And I needed to like stop playing and charge it and go do something else. And I came back. This was chapter 1. I was backstage finding Grimm. And I forgot how to leave the area.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
So that's the kind of thing we're looking at addressing. And unfortunately, like, well, our goal with the game, one of the core pillars was replayability. And that's why we have all those characters. And there's so much that you could miss, and so much that, like, so many hidden things and Easter eggs and that kind of thing. So I'm hoping that it's the kind of thing that if we do, fingers crossed, are able to address some kind of map, which is that's a big focus right now. Again, no promises, but it's another reason to come back to see another character and that kind of thing.
And on the flip side, I am a huge fan of the fact that when you vote people off, you miss out on their upgrades. There's so many games where it's just like, you got to be careful about your choices, but I can eventually get everything. I love Spider-Man for the PS4, but you can eventually get everything. And that actually kind of frustrates me a little.
Well, you are so our target audience, because, you know, one of the other pillars, we have 5 pillars, is meaningful choice. And so, like, and you talk about the voting characters off and which upgrades and this kind of thing. Again, it's not a Souls game where it's like, oh, if I choose the wrong approach here, I'm gonna be in a world apart.
Unwinnable. But if you're gonna make me get anxious and have social issues in my head about my choices, they better have some consequences.
There you go.
And they do, and I love it.
Good. Thank you. That was a goal, and it's good to hear that paid off.
You're here.
So yeah, just continue to address things. I'm not sure when we'd like officially move on to the next thing, but I think a lot of it is we still have some stuff to fulfill. Obviously, you know, this Switch version and whatnot, which is coming along, and you know, so there's still quite a bit on our plates. And to me, it'd be a dream to continue to work on the world, some kind of Romancelvania related thing for the foreseeable future. We love this world. We love the characters. And there's so much we could dig our claws into, right?
I could write this dumb shit all my life. Like,
please do. What do you need? Do you need another Kickstarter to continue?
I know, right?
I will.
Yeah. So I really got to get going on that stuff. For me, it was just like, we got to make good on everything that we've promised and continue to make it as good as possible. And like, I'm the kind of person when I hear feedback, I have my master's degree in effectively user feedback, like, you know, human factors in information design. So it's all about like user surveys and focus tests, and, you know, just really trying to figure out what makes a product work and not work, and what, you know, user needs and that kind of thing. So I love that stuff. I love getting feedback, and sometimes it's really painful, but sometimes it'll spark something amazing. And I'm always gonna be all ears. So anything I can do to make things better for people, I'm gonna do what I can, you know?
For sure. What's been fun to see is like the unanimous feeling is that folks love the world and these characters, right? There's a bug or a nitpick, like that doesn't matter. It seems like the vibe in the world that you've created carries weight over everything else. And that's, I think, at least what you want for a game, right? You want that people, nothing in life is perfect. And so you want people to see what you're going for. And it just, based on the reception that I've seen, my friends who may or may not be as horny as I am, who knows, who's to say?
Some friends.
Who's to say?
Who's horny here? Who's to say?
But it's genuinely wonderful to see people celebrate this game, because I think my favorite things about the indie scene is I don't care if someone gets it right. I care if people try something, and I care if people put themselves into the thing. And like anecdotally mentioning that you play Symphony of the Night all the time, I'm like, oh, of course they made this game. Right now, we know the people, it makes sense. And so we appreciate you guys being so generous with your time. I feel like I could talk to you for another 3 hours. Maybe someday
and we
will.
Love getting a little into, because very much a thesis for us is people bringing their history and their love of games into what they make, into what they do, into who they are. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the game necessarily, but I would feel remiss if we didn't ask at least like one little bit of history question. And this is actually one of the first times I've been able to ask this uniquely. You are a couple that games together. What are the sort of games that you like to play together?
Lately I hope this doesn't sound corny, but it's been a lot of family games. We've been playing a lot more with our kids, which for a while we've been kind of separate in how we play. It was like we sort of all did our own.
Yeah, I play this, you play that.
Yeah.
Riley plays this, Ronan plays
she's
that.
playing Persona 5 upstairs, and Riley's
nice.
playing Minecraft, and Liam's
Roblox.
playing yeah, exactly, Call of Duty, and Ronan's playing whatever on the Switch, and we have entirely too many systems and entirely too many games, and our kids don't know how spoiled they are with the video game situation. But lately it's been really encouraging to me to sit down, and particularly with, it's funny again, the game, one of the themes of the game is about moving on and letting go. And I'm a huge retro gamer, but at the same time I'm trying to, and I love them, I'm trying to be honest with myself and say, like, I'm frequently lamenting the fact that we're kind of stagnant, in the sense that I think entertainment in general is really fixated on nostalgia. And again, I'm about as nostalgic as it gets. I got Castlevania stuff everywhere. I'm not judging, but the amount of re-releases and remasters, and it's not healthy. Right. I think it's a problem, and that's part of the reason I wanted to take this on, is because I want to say, like, hey, the same but different. Like, it's fine to like what you like, and like, I just think we need to. And again, everyone should play what they love. That's what matters. Right? You just find what you love and do it.
But you can make something new with your influences without just re-releasing the thing you're nostalgic about.
Riffing and whatnot.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just the same way that you put jokes into this game that I'll get, Matt might get, or but folks a generation younger or whatever else aren't going to get, they'll have that in their heads, and they'll stand on those shoulders as you've stood on shoulders, and that is how we move forward, and that is how new weird ideas happen, and that is how a new generation gets horny about monsters.
Yeah. I actually want to piggyback on Bill's story, though, because there is a game that ties us together, and it is from when we first started dating. And we first started dating like early internet, no real cell phones. Like, we're talking the 90s. I was playing Final Fantasy VIII in Boston, and he was playing Final Fantasy VIII in LA. He spent the semester in LA. And I would call him using like a payphone card or whatever it was.
Yeah, phone cards.
And we would talk about junctioning and like how to get that right. And we kind of identified with Squall and Renoa from that game. And 20 years later-ish, almost 20 years later, we had a daughter and we named her Renoa. So
amazing. I love that. That's so sweet.
More recently, we all got together and we were playing Metroid Prime.
Nice.
Yeah, hell yeah.
I'm trying to pull away, even though I'm gonna play Resident Evil 4 for the 15th time.
Of course.
Yeah, right.
Like you do.
I sat down and I was really encouraged, with how well that game aged, and they were into it, and again, atmosphere, and like, I think that's a very disciplined game, not only from a game design perspective, but I think the art direction, all aspects of it are very, very disciplined.
It's so good to see some games. It's like, is it the nostalgia or is it just a good game?
Right.
Like Resident Evil 4, it's a good game. You're right.
Absolutely. But with the little ones here, it's really encouraging to watch them play retro games, and they don't care about the graphics. They don't care about, they are able to identify the fun. To me, that's very validating, because, you look back, and sometimes even when I go back and play some of the old games, and, they're rough around the edges and they're punishing and there's some bad UX and that kind of thing. But, it's like games that are 30 years old.
Yeah.
But you're able to look past that and get to the core of what matters, the fun. That's super cool. I think that media and social media and the way we're conditioning, I feel like that this generation is just if there's a slight thing that bothers you about a product, just like you're kind of done with it.
Because we have so many options.
Yeah, exactly. And so I love that they'll stick with it and look past the little things because they're enjoying the core.
Yeah.
That's important, not to abandon,
Well, they're loving
Agreed.
Majora's Mask.
Oh, yeah. We're sort of playing a lot of Majora's Mask. Again, they're big into Majora's Mask lately, so.
It's a fun game, and it's got a good loop. For the current kids coming up, retro gaming can also be a flat circle in an interesting way. And you're right. If the game's fun, people go to it, whatever it is. And I agree. Moving on is good, and nostalgia is good in small doses. But it's kind of very cool to see who picks up something for the first time, no matter how old it is, and it's their first time with it. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about on the show, like we did a Metroid retrospective, and I had never played the Prime series. I skipped them. I was a stubborn child, and I was like, "Oh, I don't want to play first-person version. It's dumb. It's a 2D game."
Yeah.
So when the remaster came out, I was playing a brand new Metroid game for the first time for me because I'd never played it before, and I got to play that version.
How'd you like it?
First.
Oh my God,
It was incredible.
Yeah.
It was. I see why people love it. I prefer the 2D still.
Sure.
But like, I was surprised how well the platforming worked. I was surprised how well the mechanics worked. It's a game that works, and there's a reason it's considered one of the best games ever made is because Nintendo pivots to 3D better than any other company, right?
Yep.
Mario pivoted to 3D perfectly. Zelda did. Metroid did. Like, they continue to do that with their franchises. And yeah, Metroid Prime was just another example of like, oh, they know what they're doing, and they did this well.
Yeah, I think if there's one game that, if you ask me, a game that should not exist, like should be impossible, it's Metroid Prime. Like I don't think that there's ever been a game that pulled off more secret sauce miracles than that.
No business.
Like exactly, no business. Exactly it. Yeah, no business being that good or working in that kind of way. Because I'm with you. Like Super Metroid. I mean, that game saved me. I remember playing that. Like my family had lost our home. And we went to move with my grandmother a couple cities away. And I remember sitting on the porch. We had set up a TV. All I had was my Super Nintendo. I set up a TV and Super Nintendo with Super Metroid. And I just remember being on the freezing porch with no heat and just sitting there and be able to immerse myself in Super Metroid. So I was a bit precious about that jump to first person, but I did give it a shot out of the booth, and it's a miracle.
I wrote a friend of ours who has played it and loves it and said, how does the grapple beam work? It shouldn't work.
Yeah.
It works so well.
Yeah.
Like, the grapple beam doesn't always work in 2D. And so the fact that it works so well in 3D was kind of astonishing. But
Yeah.
And I always want grappling hooks to work, and they never work as well as I want them to. So when they do.
Yeah, that's true. The real story here is that grappling hooks should be better. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Before we wrap up, I would love for you both to tell folks where they can find you online if you wish to be found. Of course, where they can find Romancelvania, platforms it's on, and how they can pick it up.
Yeah, I'm at Amanda S. Gardner on Twitter. Our handle on Twitter and Instagram is Deep End Games or The Deep End Games. He's at Game On Gardner. But you can find Romancelvania on EGS, Steam, PS5, Xbox Series S and X, eventually Switch,
and PS4. Yeah,
and eventually PS4.
No dates yet. We're just, again, there's a bit of a pivot there, and thankfully those platforms will benefit from a lot of the updates that we have been doing, and will continue to do. But definitely exciting times. It's awesome to see people connect with the game and to be able to connect with those people. So keep the feedback coming. We're super proud of this thing. You know, we really put ourselves out there and tried something different, and it's the most rewarding thing to see people, to see it resonate. It's a lot of fun to work on this thing, and it's been hugely rewarding.
This was great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hang tight while we wrap up the show. Listeners, thank you for joining us on this adventure. Have you had a chance to try Romancelvania? If you have, who's your favorite monster? Who's your least favorite, and why is it Brocifer? Because he sucks. I mean, he's a person.
I'm from New Jersey, so I have some personal issues there.
Oh no! Oh no! I gotta hear what.
I know, right?
It's
until we wrap.
It's a little bit of just that, like, I left New Jersey for a reason.
Brocifer has depth to him that people don't necessarily get around to, but if you get around to it, I've had so many people be like, I didn't expect for Brocifer to make me feel things.
Love that.
I'm sure there's plenty of those guys I went to high school with that have some depth to them.
Oh man, I love it. The visceral reaction.
But in all seriousness, if you've been playing the game, let us know. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do. And who is your favorite romance? Who's your least favorite romance? Well, why do you love this game that we love?
Which Castlevania monsters do you wish you could romance? Or what are the romance tropes that you wish could be part of a game like this? We want to know all of that and so much more. There are so many ways for you to get in touch with us. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at funandgamespod. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. You can let us know what you think of this episode, previous episodes, who you'd like us to talk to, what games you wish we could cover, or topics we should discuss on future episodes. We would love to hear all of that from you, as well as your thoughts on all of the other silly things we ask on these social media platforms. We do have our Patreon at Fun and Games Pod as well, and we would like to shout out those that are on the high scoreboard: Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Rob Bacon Golem Tremarco, Robert Proin, and Sean Bowen. Thank you so much. Please enter your initials. You can either choose to use the letters we give you as the quick and dirty, or you could explore the castle for the remaining letters and punctuation if you wanted to add a question mark or two. It's up to you, and I'm not going to tell you how many relationship points you're going to get from me for doing it.
Yeah.
We also ask that you rate and review this podcast. We put a great link right to Apple Podcasts for you in the show notes. Rating and reviews really help. If you can't join the Patreon, if you can't put the money forward, we totally get it. This is a free way that you can really help this podcast, and really any podcast that you listen to. Rate all the podcasts you listen to, please. Also, of course, you can join us in conversation over on Discord. There's a link to that in the show notes as well. On the Discord, we talk about video games, TV, movies. We have a ton of great podcasts, and all of that is in connection with our incredible podcast network, CertainPOV.com. You can go to CertainPOV.com to get merch. You can go there to check out all the other shows. There's a Discord link there as well. There are tons of great ways to interact with us, and we are so grateful for any and every way that you do so.
Because we have so many different things we would love to talk about on this episode that we only have so much time, and we want to hear your thoughts on it. We'd love to continue this conversation because it is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Path,
Sam,
we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at CertainPOV.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.